Chapter 17. Time to Go. The first few months of 1988 had been traumatic. For years, Lesley and I had agreed that we didn't want to be a nice middle-class couple with a bungalow and a hatchback car and a lawnmower. But now the prospect was very attractive indeed. My vision of other peace-loving Christians joining us to live on the peace line was a distant dream. Volunteers came and went at the 174 Trust, but no one else bought a house in the area. Other staff didn't even have to live within a mile of the centre anymore. We decided that I should begin to look for a new job, doing similar work, but a position that would allow me to come home from work in the evening and forget about it for a few hours. Lesley did a brilliant interview and got the job as a regional fundraiser for the NSPCC, which meant she earned nearly twice as much as me and got a company car. Her region was the west of Northern Ireland, which she knew very well, but living in Belfast was an inconvenience, and she had many long car journeys in her company Vauxhall Astra, taking boxes for flag days to Enniskillen and Derry. By the spring of 1988, my mother had got to a stage in her grieving process when she was prepared to let go of some of my father's belongings. The family garage was full of hundreds of tools my father had amassed during a lifetime of working as a foreman in the foundry, and my mother asked me if I wanted any of them. With my limited DIY skills and interest, I had little use for them, but as I searched through the dusty boxes of tools, I had an idea. If I gave some of the tools to some of the lads in the unemployed club, it would give them a start in developing a small business. After all the terrible times with losing Billy and Darren's arrest, I thought this would be a good way of building some hope for the future. I shared the idea in the unemployed club, and both Jerry and Paddy expressed enthusiasm. We agreed that I would donate my father's tools to help them to get started. I firmly believed in the wise proverb, often quoted in relation to community development, that if you give a man a fish, he is hungry again in an hour. But if you teach him to catch a fish, you do him a good turn. I was giving Paddy and Jerry a fishing rod. The lads accompanied me to gather the tools together, and they popped into the house to say hello to my mother. "I'm very sorry about your husband," said Jerry respectfully. My mother offered to make the lads a nice cup of tea and a Mary biscuit, which they politely declined. Afterwards, they expressed surprise at the lack of flags and loyalist symbols in my mother's house, although they thought her Charles and Diana wedding plate was lovely, so it was. They noticed my mother's royal souvenir on the wall of her living room as something different, in the same way I noticed the Sacred Heart of Jesus on the wall of their houses. We focused on gathering up the best tools in the garage. A few weeks later, I met up with the lads to check how the new business was going and to see if they had secured a good customer base in the local community. It became clear that the start-up had not started. I was reliably informed that Jerry and Paddy had sold the tools for drink. It was the final straw for me. I was giving far too much of my time, my resources and my life for very little in return. At best, I was making very little difference. At worst, I was doing more harm than good. In this instance, I suspected I was being manipulated and used by young people who ultimately thought I deserved everything I got for the audacity of parachuting into their community in the first place. There was good news when I finally heard from Downtown Radio that I was going to be trained as a presenter with a view to launching my first series of Rock Spell in the autumn. My pilot had been well received, and it seemed that I might have a broadcasting career after all. Lesley and I were so delighted that we celebrated with our favourite KFC variety meal in Glengormley Car Park. I couldn't wait to announce to the youth club that I was going to be a radio presenter, and to make the point, you could be anything you wanted to be if you really put your mind to it. "Class," said Jeff. "Well done, Tone," said Jerry. "Here, are you going to be famous now, Tony?" asked Patsy. "I can tell everyone I knew you when you were nothing, so I can." Not all of the reactions fed my ego. "DJs are wankers," commented Michael. "Aye, hang the DJ," added Tonto. The young people sang the chorus of Morrissey's Hang the DJ every few minutes for the rest of the night. A few months later, I applied for a job with the National Council of YMCAs to support YMCAs throughout Ireland who were working with socially disadvantaged young people in local communities up and down the country and on both sides of the border. The job would allow me to share my hard-earned experience in other places, across communities and across borders, and I could try to make a difference on a bigger scale. I could also go home at night and be a better husband and try to forget about work. After a demanding interview with men in blazers, to my great surprise, I got the job. Lesley was delighted, and to celebrate, we went upmarket for a monumental meal at the popular new carvery in the Barclay restaurant at Shaw's Bridge. Our lives were beginning to change, but I felt guilty about the prospect of leaving the 174 Trust. On the one hand, I was moving on to a great new opportunity, but on the other hand, I feared I was giving up on North Belfast too soon. When I handed in my resignation, both the Reverend Taylor and John Evans said they were disappointed and sad to see me go. However, their immediate plans to recruit my successor from the pool of committed volunteers proved to me the meaning of the phrase I'd often heard that no one is indispensable. Dave Moser was similarly sad but not surprised, as I had shared my thoughts about the future with him. I would miss my first fellow pacifist co-worker, and now that I was leaving the 174 Trust, we pledged we would stay in touch no matter where we went in the future. This was no idle let's keep in touch. The friendship and spirituality of Big Dave, my Mennonite friend from Indiana, would remain with me forever. I wasn't looking forward to telling the lads in the youth club that I was leaving. On the first Tuesday night youth club after I had handed in my resignation, I gathered all the young people around the pool table. "I've something to tell you, lads," I said seriously. "I'm leaving here to start a new job." Michael put down his pool cue. "Ach, Tone," he said, and then took his next shot. I was hoping at least one person would be devastated. "Are you slegging?" asked Soup. "No, I'm not slegging," I said. "I've got a new job in the YMCA." "Always thought you were a faggot as well as a specky bastard," he replied. There then followed an impromptu performance of the Village People's YMCA on top of the pool table, complete with the actions which of course damaged the top of the pool table and descended into scuffles. "Scuffles!" shouted Tonto. Sometimes it felt as though nothing had changed since my very first night in charge. Once calm was restored, I continued with my important announcement. "I'll still be living round the corner for a while, and I'll be a volunteer on a Tuesday night, so I'm not disappearing," I explained, trying to soften the impact of my news as much as possible. The youth club continued that night, as if nothing much had happened. A few of the young people came up to me and shook my hand and said thank you. I was genuinely touched by these sincere gestures. Over the years, I had taught a few of the young people to play the guitar. I had taught them the basic chords, and then they had gone to practice hard and learn by themselves, and they turned out to be much better and more talented guitar players than me. My prayer was that a few of the ideas I had shared about faith and love and hope might bear similar fruit in their lives. Later that night, as I was checking all the doors and locking up the centre, Dan approached me. "Why are you leaving, Tone?" he asked. "Well, Dan, this is not the sort of job you can do forever," I explained. "I'd love a job like yours," he said. "Sure, you just sit around and play pool all day." "Come on, Dan, you know there's a lot more to it than that." "Only slagging," he replied. I gave him a friendly pat on the back. "Well, any job at all would do me," he said sadly. "You'll be all right, Dan," I said. "I'm sure you'll get a job one day. You're a good lad, so you are. Most of yous round here are good lads." "Everyone leaves us, you know," said Dan. I could see tears in his eyes. He appeared to be filling up. "What do you mean?" I asked. "All yous youth workers come and tell us how important we all are to you, and you say you'd do anything to help us, but yous all leave us in the end. You're just the same as all the others, and the next one will be just the same as you." I had no reply to this. Dan was probably right. I put my arm around his shoulder and walked him out of the front door of the Salt Shaker Centre and onto the paint-splattered footpath on the Antrim Road. It seemed like only yesterday that the police-propelled paint bomb had landed at our feet and he had commenced my education about living on the other side. "Well, I hope I made a bit of a difference," I said. Den looked over at the British Army watchtower, where a pair of eyes and a gun were pointing in our direction. "Don't worry, Tone. There's hundreds of years of British oppression to deal with round here. It's going to take a long time, so it is." Lesley and I made the decision that the time was right to put our little house up for sale. In the first few days there was no interest. In the next few weeks there was no interest. And the following few months there was still no interest. Not a single viewing. Lesley's prediction was right. No one wanted to buy a little house on the peace line, especially as the houses at the end of the row still had boarded up windows from the latest sectarian attacks. By the summer of 1988, I had started my new job and Lesley was driving miles around the country for the NSPCC, but we still couldn't sell the house. We asked our solicitor and the co-ownership association if it was possible to get a bridging loan so that we could move, but the rules made it impossible. I asked the Reverend Taylor and John Evans if the 174 Trust would consider buying our house to use as a home for volunteers, but they decided to buy a much bigger house on the Cliftonville Road instead. Our vision of a community of radical Christians living on the peace line to witness and work for peace was gone. We were left with faded dreams and an unsellable house. All our idealism had come to this. Every day we prayed for a solution to our problem, and then, when we had almost given up hope, we received a phone call from the estate agent. The good news was that a couple wanted to view the house that evening. We frantically tidied every room from top to bottom, which took about an hour, and put some potpourri in our best Ainsley dish to make the house at least smell desirable. Farah was banished to the garden. When the couple arrived, they explained that they had relatives living just across the road. So when I said, "It's lovely, it's very quiet round here too, so it is," the prospective buyers gave me a "who do you think you're kidding" look. However, within only a few hours, they put in an offer, and we accepted so swiftly that our desperation must have been obvious. We were finally relieved that we would no longer be living there for the rest of our lives. A few months later, I returned to the house for the last time. We were now living with Lesley's parents in Balaki for a few months until we could move into our bungalow in Macrofelt. It was my turn to move into Lesley's territory. All our furniture was in storage. There were no curtains on the windows, and as the electricity had already been switched off, the rooms were lit up only by the blurry orange glow of the security lights from the army barracks. I walked through every room and reflected on the past 3 years in the home in which our married life began. I remembered the day in my bedroom that I heard that Billy had died. The day of my father's inquest at Crumlin Road Courthouse, when my family had gathered here. The evening we brought Farah home for the first time. The day our neighbour had kidnapped the fucking mutt. And the day she gave birth to a litter of pups. I remembered the lunch times with Lesley watching Neighbours, and the evenings I enjoyed in front of the television, earnestly attempting to introduce Dave Moser to the wonders of Doctor Who. And when I went upstairs, I thought again of all the sleepless nights when Lesley had asked, "Is anybody there?" Finally, after revisiting every room, I sat on the green carpet in the living room, where so many different feet had trod over the past 3 years. I was thankful for all that we had achieved, and even hopeful that some of our work might have made a difference. I was no longer the naive, idealistic young man who had moved into this area 3 years ago, but I was still an optimist, and I retained a deep-seated hope that all our work had not been in vain. I prayed to God and thanked Him for keeping us safe, and asked Him to bless and protect all the youth workers that would come after me to continue the work of the 174 Trust, as well as the young people from the New Lodge who were at the heart of everything I'd done or tried to do. After a long time sitting in the orange glow, I got up and walked towards the front door with tears in my eyes. Strangely, I think they were tears of joy. I was happy to have started out with Lesley in this house. I was glad to have survived the past 3 years, and I was excited about the future. I closed the door behind me for the very last time and said goodbye to the little house on the peace line.